Imagine for a second that it's 2026. The United States is standing at a major fork in the road. And depending on who you ask, there are two profoundly different stories being told about where the country is, and more importantly, where it's going. One story is all about a massive economic revolution, about reclaiming sovereignty. The other? Well, that's a story about a radical break from the past that could literally reshape the entire global order. Today, we're going to unpack both. Okay, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll lay out those two competing visions right next to each other so you can see the contrast. Then, we'll dive deep into the global economic showdown that's really at the heart of this whole thing. After that, we'll look at how America's place in the world is being completely redefined and what that means for its oldest allies and biggest rivals. And finally, we're going to wrap up with the biggest question of all. Is any of this permanent? You know, to really get what's going on in this 2026 scenario, you have to understand we're not just talking about minor policy disagreements. No. We are talking about two fundamentally opposed, totally competing visions for what America is and what it should be. All right, take a look at this, because this slide gets right to the core of the conflict. On one side, you have this idea of a great awakening, which you'll hear about from sources like the X22 report. The narrative here is that everyday people are finally rising up to break free from a corrupt, centralized global financial system. But then on the other side, you've got the view from organizations like the Brookings Institution, and they see something completely different. They don't see liberation. They see a dangerous rejection, a repudiation of the entire global order that's been in place since the Second World War, all being replaced by this transactional America First nationalism. Now, this clash of worldviews isn't just some abstract debate. It gets very, very real when you start looking at the economy. This is the main battlefield. This is where the battle for control is actually being fought. So if you're looking at this from the X22 report's perspective, what we're witnessing is an all-out war against the central banking system. The belief is that these banks manipulate currency and control everything. So a real, tangible asset like silver, as this quote points out, isn't just a smart investment. It's seen as a weapon. It's a way to break free from that manipulated system and tie the economy back to something real.
And this worldview, it extends to everything, right down to trade deals. They aren't seen as tools for mutual growth. Instead, they're viewed as strategic traps. The idea, as laid out here, is that agreements like the USMCA were actually designed to give the U.S. ultimate leverage over its partners, all in the service of reclaiming total economic control as part of that Great Awakening. But, of course, there is a completely different way to look at all this. The Brookings Institution, for example, offers a pretty stark warning. They argue that these aggressive economic tools, like constantly threatening tariffs, could seriously backfire. The big fear is that by overusing these economic weapons, the U.S. might actually be weakening its single greatest strength on the world stage, the status of the U.S. dollar as the global reserve currency.
So, with this economic war raging, what does that mean for America's role in the world? Well, as you can probably guess, it forces a huge, radical shift in foreign policy. And here it is, the big headline change. For decades, U.S. foreign policy has been obsessed with major power competition, with Russia and China. But the new national security strategy, as one scholar points out, just stops talking about it. Not one mention. It's like the focus just snaps from this huge global chessboard to America's own backyard, the Western Hemisphere. Analysts at Brookings actually have a name for this new doctrine. They call it the Trump corollary. Now, you might remember the old Monroe Doctrine from the 1800s basically told Europe to stay out of the Americas. Well, this new corollary is like a 21st century reboot. It's a very blunt reassertion of U.S. dominance, where the main goal is to use the entire region as a massive buffer zone to keep any and all threats far away from American soil. And what does that mean in practice? Well, it breaks down into three pretty clear objectives. First, do whatever it takes to stop all migration flows into the U.S. Second, actively counter and push back against China's growing economic influence in the region. And third, assert the right for the U.S. military to go after cartels anywhere in the hemisphere with or without permission. Okay, so if America is turning its focus so intensely inward toward its own hemisphere, what does that mean for its oldest and closest friends? As you can imagine, it completely changes the game for traditional allies, especially those in Europe. This slide really says it all. The old idea was burden sharing. Everyone chips in, we're all in it together. The new strategy is described as burden shifting. The U.S. is essentially looking at its allies and saying, this is your burden now. Alliances are no longer seen as partnerships. They're seen as a financial drain, a cost to be offloaded.
And this quote from a Brookings scholar shows just how seriously some are taking this shift. When the official U.S. strategy involves actively supporting opposition parties inside allied nations, well, she argues it crosses a very dangerous line. It's not just foreign policy at that point. As she puts it, it's a direct threat to the legitimacy of allied governments, something she says an earlier age would have recognized as the language of tyranny. So, all of this turmoil, this radical new direction, it all leads us to the one question that really, really matters. It's the one posed by observers at the Atlantic Council. Is any of this actually going to stick around?
And this quote from the Atlantic Council just frames that question perfectly using a great metaphor. Is all of this chaos just a passing political storm, a temporary, if dramatic, change in the weather? Or is it something much deeper? Is it a fundamental change in the political climate that will permanently alter America's role in the world for good?
And that right there is the question we'll leave you with. Are we just witnessing a chaotic but temporary change in the political weather? Or are we in the middle of a massive change in the entire climate, a fundamental shift that's going to reshape the world for decades to come? Figuring that out is really the central challenge of 2026.